All right, let's jump straight into it. Welcome to this explainer, where we are unpacking what has to be one of the most fascinating and honestly wild digital conflicts happening right now. We're looking at a fierce internet clash that, if you just glance at the surface, looks like your standard messy comment section argument, but it's actually decoding this incredible hidden intersection of religion, modern media, and deep geopolitics. Seriously, if you've ever wondered how the stories we consume actively shape the systems that govern us, you are in the exact right place.
So, launching right into the mystery here, when you first read the comments sparking this whole debate, they are intense. They're hostile, they're super repetitive. To a casual observer, and definitely to an automated moderation algorithm, it looks exactly like standard internet spam or just really aggressive trolling. But as we dug into the source material, we found out this might actually be a highly calculated, profoundly deep theological defense operating right under our noses.
To really get this, we've got to introduce our two main players. On one side, we have British sci-fi critic Damien Walter. He analyzes media through a strictly secular, analytical lens, what the ancient Greeks called logos. That's all about logic, science, and cold hard facts. Now, on the exact opposite side, we have commenter Kyle McLean-Smith. He operates entirely in the realm of mythos. He views those very same stories through a deeply religious, sacred lens, prioritizing meaning and shared sacred experiences. Walter's whole argument is that our modern society is hyper-focused on logos, and we've completely lost touch with our mythos. And this clash totally ignites over Walter's concept of what he calls Jesus smuggling. According to Walter, Jesus smuggling happens when a science fiction or fantasy story is built as a secret Christian allegory, without the mainstream audience even realizing it. Think about what C.S. Lewis did with Narnia. Walter points to massive modern blockbusters like Interstellar, claiming these secretly smuggle in these Christian themes. He actually argues that when secular audiences finally notice this hidden religious subtext, they end up hating the movie because they feel tricked. When Walter talks about this hidden theological subversion online, he frames it as a cynical attempt to inject religious propaganda into a secular sci-fi skin. And it's exactly this framing, treating Christian themes as something that has to be smuggled and hidden away from the viewer, that triggers an incredibly intense, fiery response from our commenter, Kyle McLean-Smith. Which brings us to the core tension of this whole explainer. We're looking at Walter's premise of secretly smuggled theology versus Smith's absolute gold standard. For Smith, that standard is the openly integrated, totally unapologetic presence of faith in art. He doesn't think the sacred needs to be snuck through the back door of a sci-fi script. He believes truly great art has always proudly and openly spiritualized its narratives. And to prove it, he brings up a very specific piece of pop culture. Smith opens his counterattack by actively weaponizing the phrase, "O brother, where art thou?" Now, he isn't just randomly ranting. He's intentionally deploying the title of this beloved movie to directly mock Walter's panic over secret allegories. By doing this, he completely reframes the debate from a simple sci-fi movie review into a passionate defense of open religious art. Smith holds this film up as the absolute gold standard and the ultimate Homeric precedent. See, the Coen brothers' O Brother, Where Art Thou is famously an explicit, localized adaptation of Homer's ancient epic, the Odyssey. But the crucial point here is that the filmmakers intentionally swapped out the capricious ancient Greek gods for 1930s Southern American Christianity. We're talking baptisms, blind prophets, gospel spirituals, the whole nine yards. Smith is essentially asking Walter, why are you hunting for hidden allegories and calling it smuggling when classic epic journeys have always been openly and proudly spiritualized? He uses this Homeric precedent to sharply contrast against Walter's purely secular critiques. So, while Walter breaks sci-fi down into these secular mechanisms, Smith just aggressively pulls the sacred right back into the discussion. When they look at a film like Blade Runner 2049, Smith argues that elements like a replicant giving birth literally prove these creations possess a soul. Instead of viewing famous cinematic moments, like that iconic Tears in the Rain speech, as cold science fiction, Smith treats them as literal Holy Spirit inspiration. He's reclaiming modern mythology from the secular critics with this massive sense of spiritual wonder. Let's move into our first major section: myth, ideology, and empire, how stories shape systems. Because at this point, it's clear we aren't just talking about movies anymore. We are talking about how these stories actually engineer society. The source material points us to how George Lucas intentionally used Joseph Campbell's theories of the monomyth, the classic hero's journey, to create Star Wars. But scholars take it a step further. They brilliantly illustrate how modern pop culture shifts from pure mythology into an ideological covering for global capitalism. They actually call this a form of Western Buddhism. Basically, the underlying operation of concepts like the Force is really a desire for a secular legal order. It's a way to maintain peace in a precarious civilization, but without relying on traditional organized religion. This whole process is called mythopoeia, the conscious creation of a new mythology. And Walter argues this ideological shift is exactly what tech billionaires are doing today. He points out the massive contradiction of figures like Peter Thiel, who profess Orthodox Christian faith, yet actively fund the transhumanist pursuit of physical immortality here on Earth. The argument is that they're attempting to build a godless corporate religion, a kind of tech feudalism, where the ultra-wealthy transcend humanity and the rest of us are left behind controlled by these newly created secular myths. Which takes us to Section 2, the realpolitik parasite, a biological metaphor for digital geopolitics. To explain his absolute resistance to this tech feudalism, Smith introduces a startling, real-world biological metaphor. He draws on some truly wild research from Penn State regarding the Ophiocordyceps fungus. You've probably heard it called the zombie ant fungus. Researchers discovered that this parasite doesn't actually infect the ant's brain to control it. Instead, the fungal cells form this 3D network that surrounds and invades the muscle fibers throughout the ant's entire body. It controls the host peripherally, moving the ant like a literal marionette, all while leaving the brain perfectly intact. It's a terrifying, highly effective form of operational control. Smith brilliantly juxtaposes the biology of this peripheral fungal control with his own grand geopolitical theory. He argues that the American Republic is currently acting as a host that has been infected by an external imperial parasite, specifically the British and Anglosphere elite. Just like that fungus controls the ant while leaving its brain intact, Smith claims this external power is enforcing ideological control over the American system, hiding its true intentions behind massive tech billionaires and global narratives. And this is where the conflict gets incredibly specific and honestly, a little amusing in its intensity. Smith refers to himself as the architect. He's a legal engineer who builds decentralized mathematical sequences designed to outmaneuver centralized power. On the flip side, Damien Walter literally describes his own background as a former UK Special Forces librarian. To Smith, this isn't just a quirky resume detail. It is undeniable proof that Walter is a soft power agent of the British Crown, actively manipulating the shared culture of the Anglosphere. This leads directly to what the sources call the 1776 defense hypothesis. See, when Walter issues a standard 48-hour YouTube copyright ultimatum, Smith doesn't just respond with a normal legal defense. Instead, he frames this mundane copyright dispute as a literal act of foreign intelligence capture against the American Republic. He genuinely views the legal threat as a mechanism of systemic control used by the King of England's apostasy to silence American sovereignty. It is a massive, revolutionary framework applied directly to a digital comment section dispute. So, Section 3, Spam or Prophetic Proclamation, the algorithmic enclosure. How exactly do modern digital platforms, managed entirely by code and algorithms, handle this intense, asymmetric ideological war? Well, when we compare the platform's diagnostic tools against Smith's theological context, a massive disconnect appears. The algorithm flags Smith's identical, repetitive phrases and automatically bans them as spam. But contextually, this repetition is a liturgical litany. It's a sacred warning. The algorithm flags aggressive hostility as trolling. But theologically, it's a deliberate realpolitik critique of an imperial agent. The algorithm is literally blind to the spiritual urgency behind the words. And this illustrates the core tension of our digital age perfectly. What the automated platform system automatically flags as abusive trolling or community guideline violation, historical theologians would actually classify as a prophetic proclamation. This is the exact unyielding, disruptive, and deeply adversarial language historically used by biblical prophets like John the Baptist or Elijah to shock and condemn a compromised culture. Smith is fighting a spiritual war using linguistic weapons that our platforms are explicitly programmed to suppress. This results in what the sources call a digital enclosure movement, or the realpolitik paradox of scale. Because these platforms operate as centralized global squares, they allow the secular, materialist narrative, like Damien Walter's theories, to easily scale globally. But if someone like Smith posts an urgent, structurally repetitive theological counter-critique, it immediately gets filtered into oblivion as spam. The structural design of the platform ensures that the spiritual counter-narrative is micro-targeted for deletion. Which leaves us with this final, really profound question to think about. If our digital public square algorithmically silences the secret as mere spam or trolling, whose mythos is truly shaping your reality? Are you consuming stories that reflect your values, or are you absorbing the carefully engineered ideologies of a tech feudal empire? I really hope this explainer challenges you to reconsider the hidden architecture of the media you engage with every day. Keep questioning the narrative.